Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. Welcome to Everything Cooperative. This beautiful Thursday morning in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. You know, this is a new year, and we're going to start off this year talking to Mr. Andrew Stettner from the Century Foundation. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Good. What is the Century Foundation?
The Century Foundation is a 100-year-old nonpartisan think tank committed to opportunity, equity, and security in the nation and across the world.
Opportunity, equity, and
security.
Security around the world. Okay, that sounds like a lot. Around the world.
Yeah, we're based in New York, and we actually started by Edward Filene when he was alive, and then when he passed away, wanted to do good, for people. So I'm a researcher on myself and activist around the economy and jobs.
How long has the Century Foundation been around?
100 years.
Oh, okay. I get opportunity, equity, and security. So equity has been or inequity is on the rise and has been in the news a lot. Are you guys involved in dealing with issues around inequity around the world, even in the U.S. here?
Yeah, my particular work really focuses on making the economy fair, how to create a more inclusive, sustainable economy, and I think this is a very important time. We finally kind of come out of the depths of an economic crisis. So now we should be talking about the kind of economy we want to build, proactively and more sustainably. And so I think it's a very important time, for that conversation.
So the depths you're talking about is the Great Recession of 2007 and 8?
Yeah, this Great Recession and financial crisis, it took, millions of people lost their jobs and communities were devastated. It took a long time to climb our way out of that. And now we're there, and now I think we can think about, not just reacting, but being proactive about what kind of economy we want to create.
Andrew, I want to go directly into the political climate, but I'm going to try to stay away from that for the moment. You're doing the research, and is that research to help set policies so that the politicians can perhaps put policies in place, or do you all go and actively try to get politicians to put policies in place so that we can have a sustainable, inclusive economy?
I think we try to do a bit of both, and I think, and focusing at various levels. A lot of things can be done at the state and city level, the county level, to come up with new models. And there's a big part of what I do is there's a lot of great best practices that have been developed in one city or one community that could be scaled, more nationally. And then we're also trying to think of, some big ideas to answer some of the major questions that the economy faces. What do we do about the tremendous wealth inequality in the country? What do we do about a future of work where technology, may replace many of the jobs that we have today? And so trying to think about, looking a little further than just the current Congress and the current president to think about what are the big ideas that are needed, to respond to these, major trends.
Fantastic, because if you get immersed in the current Congress and the current situations, you probably could not look over to see the big picture. Can you describe this wealth inequality, kind of like how do we get there and how big is it and how bad is it?
One thing I think that's, there's different kinds of inequality. We have lots of income inequality, with the CEOs of companies in the U.S. making, 30 to 50 times, the average worker, but even more deep is wealth inequality. So people having less, savings and assets, with, particularly this is, particular concern, for communities of color who, probably have, I think on average less than 10% of the wealth of the average white American. And that's an area that was really damaged in this financial crisis. It was there before, but it was really damaged in the financial crisis. And so, we actually have some real work to do also in terms of ideas about how to deal with wealth inequality. When it comes to income inequality, the solutions roll off your fingertips. So let's have a stronger minimum wage, or make it easier for people to join unions, or access better training for a better job. But when we're talking about wealth, those are a bigger challenge, especially when, at a time where most people, have less than a month of savings in their bank account. How do you start building wealth in that, in that situation? So I think that's an area where, we need a lot more ideas and thinking. And I think, and some of the issues I know you cover on this show are so important when we're thinking about wealth.
Yeah, wealth it's amazing that in this great recession of 2007 and 8, when people lost their homes, that was their biggest asset. And more often than not, that was the asset. So when you lost that home, you lost that equity in your home. It was amazing how fast it turned around. It didn't feel like it was going to turn around fast in 8, 9, 10. But 11, 12, if you look at now, 17, 18, the price of the houses have gone back up even more than what they were before, particularly here in the Washington, D.C. area, New York, California. They've gone up, and that if people could have held on to their houses, then they would have had even more equity, but they ended up losing them. And black folks, people of color, that was the main asset. If they had an asset, that was what it was normally in. Because I get frustrated on this topic.
Yeah, no, I think, and then I think when it comes to also other forms of wealth people have, like pensions, or other forms of wealth that people had access to, those have been cut off for regular working people. So we have to think about some new ideas, when it comes to wealth, and people have been. I think housing is a great example, because people have been shut out of the current rebound in the housing recovery because of the way that banks have really tightened their lending standards. So I think we're nowhere near the percentages of home ownership we were before the crisis. So you're right, people aren't being given access to that way of generating wealth. So I think it's important that we reestablishing the housing way of gaining wealth, but also establish some additional ways that people are able to build wealth. And I think a variety of ideas. I'm a big fan of Derek Hamilton from the New School. His idea of creating a baby bond, for every child that's born, that there should be $20,000, set aside in an account that can grow, and they can access it, when they become older. So giving everyone a little bit of a nest egg, at birth. That we need some new ideas, and certainly, the idea of employee ownership, either through worker cooperatives or employee-owned companies. I think it's a real critical way that we need to have more people have an opportunity to access wealth.
Well, getting wealth, I started to say I get real frustrated in this area. Andrew, I got my MBA out of Stanford, and I took a class called Black Economics. This was in 1975. And I really took away one real lesson, and that was that black folks buy depreciating assets and white folks buy appreciating assets. And depreciating assets are vacations, cars, clothes. Those are the kind of assets that black folks would buy, where whites would buy stocks and bonds and houses and businesses, etc. And later on, I learned, that's what I got out of the class, but I learned that that's poverty-focused mentality. People in poverty mentality buy those depreciating assets, and wealth mentality people buy appreciating assets. And getting people to the point of buying appreciating assets, whether it's bonds, it's getting treasury bonds, or used to go to the post office and buy these, I forgot what they were called now. It's been so long ago. But it was, you would put in $10 and you'd buy this bond back, and it would end up being worth $20 down the road. Mm-hmm. But being able to save money and create assets is critical to every family, every human being, and every business. I really like what you're dealing with, and I want to come back. We've got to take a break, but I'm going to want to come back and talk to you about this baby bond. I just really heard about that. Like, where did that $20,000 come from, and how would that work? And the reason for the program is to get to talk about worker cooperatives. Quickly, though, how did you get into this business? How did you get into this world?
I get into this business. I think, it's been my life's work. I grew up in Detroit and was not a community that did well in the 70s, but I was lucky enough to go to schools with civil rights veterans and economic activists who kind of, taught me the way and brought me into this work at a very young age.
Yeah, I'd not even heard about the Century Foundation, so it's fascinating. I want to know more about what you all do. It sounds great, the two articles that I've been looking at, the one you did and the one on reducing economic inequality through democratic worker ownership. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
Fantastic.
Washington, D.C.'s News Talk, 1450 AM WOL and 95.9 FM.
Information is power, and that's why the National Cooperative Bank is sponsoring this program to give you information about cooperatives. We're going to be talking about worker-owned cooperative here in a few minutes. So that if you take this information and put action to it, you've got to put the action to it in order to get the power. Andrew Stettner is our guest today from the Century Foundation, a 100-year-old foundation, that looks at the economy, inclusiveness, sustainability. It's fascinating stuff. Let me make a real quick disclaimer. I've been sick for about 12 days, and I'm having a hard time keeping up with all of this great information, but I'm wanting to, so I'll do the best I can with you, Andrew, here today. Andrew, you
My pleasure.
Okay. Thank you, buddy. So right before we took the break, we wanted to talk about the different ways of creating wealth. So can you talk a little bit more about this baby bond? Where would this $20,000 come from?
So it would be a federal investment. And the idea is, when you look at the long term, rather than having to spend money on the back end, in income support programs, student financial aid, subsidized insurance, if you give kids a baby a chance to have an account that would be established and their parents could add more money to it, and when they become of age, they could have some wealth, this would be a much better investment. I think Professor Hamilton estimates it would cost about $80 billion to establish this type of account, but that's much less than is spent on many of the programs that we have out there for that are fixing things in the back end. But this idea would see to let's at least shift some of our spending from fixing problems at the back end and have it be more. Let's try to invest at the front end. So it would be very similar to what you were talking about with this idea of bond savings or some really basic savings. So just kind of getting people started, with some basic savings, that they could build over time.
Well, I heard this being discussed, and it was like if somebody came from a wealthy family, they would get less, and if it came from a really, really poor, impoverished family, they would get more. And the idea is that the money would be used for assets. That's going to college, creating a business, buying a home, but it's asset creation.
That's correct. So something that would be an asset, building account. And there are some things that are moving. Several cities have children's savings accounts that the city puts some startup money in. It's been modest, but it can build over time. And usually the uses of those children's savings accounts are limited. In many cases, it's limited to educational uses. But it can build, but it builds over time. And when you talk with people and the participants and the coaches that have worked with these families, it's a real change. Even if it's a small amount of money, it's a real changed idea. If you're starting to save and you see you even have $5,000 saved for college, well, it becomes much more of a reality that you're expecting that your child is going to go to college. If you got $5,000 in the children's savings account, that you've been contributing a little bit, and the government's been matching you to help that savings be a little bit easier.
Well, the whole savings sort of phenomenon, getting people to understand savings. I have a nephew who got hit on a bicycle, and he had $60,000 in the bank. And when he got 18, he was able to get the courts to give him 20. Well, that 20 lasted, 20 days, 20,000. You just go through it. When they don't know, they just go through it very quickly. And that may have lasted 30 or 40, but it just didn't last very long. But it's teaching people the education part to go with it. When I first heard about the baby bond, that's what I thought of. Is how do you instill in this sort of savings or asset creation mentality as opposed to I've got to have it right now, immediate gratification mentality, which is
I think I think you're making a good point, and I'm sure there are some great financial coaching organizations out there. So I think that's certainly one aspect of how we can teach that mentality, but also setting things up like children's savings account or retirement account where you kind of see the money build up over time, and there's some restrictions about how you can use the money. So a little bit of a push and pull. One thing I've studied a little bit of behavioral economics. Mm-hmm. We also have to make it a lot easier. We should be making savings more of an opt-out versus an opt-in. One idea I've been following is, it's been held up with some controversy, but more the idea that everyone, regardless of what kind of business that or employer you have, everyone should have an automatic retirement contribution, even if it's only 1% of your wages. That should be automatic. And there should just be an opt-out. It shouldn't be an opt-in. You should have to make the choice not to save. We have to make it easier for people to save and build assets.
I like that idea because, again, most people, if the poverty mentality or borrowing from Peter pay Paul kind of economy. Well, here, let me say it another way. The study was done that if there was an emergency where people needed $400, that 47% of Americans would not have that money, that $400. And I was amazed when I heard that stat, that most Americans would not have $400 in a savings account in a bank to cover that emergency. So that means they go to payday lenders or other things that just gets you in worse and worse and worse shape. So, yeah, it would be great if we could get people to save for that what my mother's favorite saying, Andrew, was there's always something.
Yeah.
And so we know there's always going to be something that's going to pop up. There's going to be some emergency. It could be minor if you have savings, and it would be major if you don't. Somebody breaks the window out and it's minus 10 degrees outside. That's an emergency if you can't get that window fixed. Yeah. So your research, and how did this one paper, Reducing Economic Inequality Through Democratic Worker Ownership, you were saying that this baby bond is one way of getting saved, and employee worker ownership is another way of increasing wealth. Talk a little bit about that. Yeah,
so I'll tell you, when I first, kind of started following worker ownership, as I mentioned, I came from the Midwest, and, where a lot of factories, were closed as I was growing up. But there was kind of a strain and some great activists that were helping, trying to help people buy those, factories, before they, if they were in danger of closing. And so that's how I kind of got, interested, in this idea of employee ownership. And really, I think it has a couple of, great benefits, to the economy. One, it's, if workers are owning, the company, then they have a chance to participate in more of the upside of growth. So, with wages, not going up as much, they have a chance to also, to share in some of the appreciation of the underlying value, of the company. And that's also a way of promoting democracy. Unions were our main way of promoting more democratic decision-making and involvement in the economy, but they've really declined. And so cooperatives provide another means where, workers can have an input in decisions, that they are making. And lastly, whether it's a neighborhood in a more urban area that's been, devastated by economic change, or whether it's a small rural community that's been left behind, we need more ideas about how to develop, businesses and employment within the communities where the hardest hit live. And, one way of doing that is, starting, businesses that are owned by people in the community through cooperative economic development. So I think it has a lot of really, real, potential as economic development strategy. And like a lot of things, the U.S. has lagged behind other countries in the cooperative sector.
Right.
Whether it's a few hours to the north in Quebec, where there's a very vibrant cooperative sector, or whether it's Europe in Spain and Italy, we've really lagged behind the cooperative sector. So we commissioned this paper and started doing research to try to understand what would be some of the ways to unlock the potential of the cooperative sector in the United States.
We have to take another break. I still have some other questions for you, sir. I hope you can stay with us. To come back after the break to talk about this in Italy and Quebec and this worker ownership and the benefits that you just talked about. We'll be right back.
Washington, D.C.'s News Talk, 1450 AM WOS and 95.9 FM.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. We have Mr. Andrew Stettner on the line with us from the Century Foundation. And before we took a break, we were talking about the benefits of worker-owned businesses in the economy. And so one of the things I wanted to tell you, Andrew, was I had a guy on the program named Papa Sin from Senegal. We been on this program a little over 4 years. So he said that that co-ops are created to solve community problems. And he really nailed the nail in when he said, if there's no community problems, there's no need for a co-op. So when you start talking about whether the problems in the big cities or the small rural communities, getting people to come together to create businesses. I mean, they know the community and they know what businesses are needed, what problems are there in the community, and so they can create businesses around those communities to solve those particular problems. So I was really identifying with what you were saying with what Papa Sin had been talking about. So what do you think about co-ops? They are created to solve community problems.
I think that's certainly, I would say there's two, both to solve community problems, but also to bring wealth into the community. Some of the most, successful co-ops in the U.S. Do both. So I've known the folks at Cooperative Home Care Associates in New York for a very long time. So they created a cooperatively-owned home care agency that provides employment and serves older people in their neighborhood, but also is now a major player in home care services in the city. That's bringing in additional wealth, and customers, from other parts of other parts of the city. I think so I think you have both. You have both social service co-ops and artisanal co-ops that can develop to both meet community needs, but also have a different way of creating goods and services that can be sold outside. Always when we're trying to build up the wealth of a community, we have to think about the wealth that's already there, but also trying to bring in some wealth from outside by creating goods and services that are sellable. One of the interesting things we found in this research that was really interesting to me is that it's a lot harder to start a co-op in the United States than it is in other parts of the world. We don't have.
Before you change over to that subject, and I want to get there, I want to go back to what you said just quickly to emphasize something I got from what you were saying was, okay, so co-ops are created to solve community problems. So in the example you use, it's hard to get people to come in and help older folks as we are aging to come in and so they can stay in place. So to create this co-op, and the co-op helped the employees to have a better wage. This co-op home care. But what I hadn't thought about it is, well, there's another problem in the community, and that is I've thought about it as a solution, as a benefit, but not as a solution. The benefit is that the co-op helps the employees because they have a better wage, and so they can create both financial wealth and social wealth, and the co-op helps the economy of the community because the people that work in the co-op and that co-op normally lives in that community, and therefore they spend their money in that community, and that money turns 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times in the community, and so the whole community increases in wealth, not only the individual workers. So you're creating wealth for the individual worker, you're creating wealth for the community. It's a win-win-win-win world. So it's like, why don't we have more of these things? It's a win.
I think you're right, and we're also in many cases helping to solve a social problem, right? By creating more goods and services in communities that don't have them, and being able to have them be locally created. So I think you asked why don't we have more of them, and I think we haven't embraced our nation hasn't embraced this way of economic development. We don't, even the very basic things, which is what I found very interesting about our research. There's not even a clear place in the IRS code that marks something as a worker cooperative, and then would set up some incentives for work cooperatives to exist. So that seems that's one of the first steps that would be needed, and some states have tried to address that. And then then we're gonna to take advantage. And I think this is what's very exciting for me to see. Groups that want to start cooperatives need some assistance, in navigating it and setting it up, and that's certainly been a big feature in many countries. But we're seeing some cities really move in that direction. Cities, from New York to Cleveland, all over the country that have started programs around cooperative development as a strategy. And so it's really kind of, I think, really taking off, with, some of the assistance that's needed for people to set up co-ops.
New York has set up a fund of $5 million, $1 million a year for 5 years for technical assistance and helping people get start co-ops or working on co-ops. Madison, Wisconsin set up to $5 million, $1 million a year. New York put $2.5 million, I think, a year ago, and this current year we're in fiscal year $2.6 million to start co-ops. Cleveland has started a program of worker-owned co-ops of the universities and hospitals using their buying power, like cleaning of the laundry, creating a co-op to produce food and vegetables so that they can, a greenhouse so they can buy those vegetables. Richmond has a department called Department of Building Wealth. It came out of the book of Communities Building Wealth. And it fascinating book on what steps are to take so that community, and that's what we were just talking about a few minutes ago. So there's a way, but I guess, Andrew, I've been skeptical in my years on this planet, and I just believe that the people in power, particularly those people that are wealthy, those 1%ers that get for every dollar that's made in the U.S. this year, they get 57% of it. And I think I read in your Reducing Economic Inequality that 160,000 people in the top end get 22% of every dollar generated, every penny. But the bottom, was it 60%? 44 million people get 22% also. So you get less than 1%, 1/10 of 1% get 22% of the wealth, and then you have the bottom, I think it was 60, I can't remember, it was huge. 44 million people have $22 million in wealth. I think that's what the numbers were. So it's how do we change that around, and this co-op model is one of the ways of doing it. But I have believed that the people in the top don't want us to know about this co-op world. And they don't want us to have laws that would help co-op and the individuals. And so it makes it difficult.
No, I think it's very interesting because I think there is some, bipartisan, interest in some of these ideas because, owning your own company and building wealth from the ground up is something that everyone believes in, but it does run a little counter to the current way of thinking. Everyone's trying to make a short-term profit. Everyone's trying to extract wealth from a situation rather than make a long-term investment in something that's going to build wealth over time. And so it's a mindset change. It's part of a mindset change, of how we build wealth, in the economy. And, we've, kind of relied on this more extractive way of building wealth, and very unequal way of building wealth, rather than a more patient, way of building wealth. So it is going to take a mindset change, and I do think there is, some, resistance that would have to be, confronted. But I think we're confronting it, in this idea of worker co-ops. We're confronting it from a very, positive, place of trying to build businesses from the ground up. And part of the thing that's exciting about what's happening in some of the cities is, I think actually the mindset around cooperatives in the U.S. was people thought of it as a food co-op. That's what co-op most people had heard of.
Hippies. Yep.
Yeah, right. So hippies, and so they're not, and so it's kind of educating, even people who come from Quebec said, no, this is, we have major sectors of our economy, daycare centers and printing co-ops and major sectors of our economy that rely on co-ops to wake people up that this can be a bigger model for economic development, or so I think that's a kind of that's part of also the barrier that we're trying to, I think, get over. Both worker cooperative ownership, and I'm also we have had more success with employee ownership because the tax code is more favorable to that. So that's a good lesson that we do have. I think it's something when we wrote our last paper about 13 million Americans, so that's not insignificant. Work in an employee-owned company, and that's because there's some tax advantages there. And so if we extended those same tax advantages to worker co-ops, we could see some real conversion of companies. But the best ideas always start from below, and so I think that's why it's exciting that I think you see some of this development coming out from the below.
Andrew, it's exciting talking to you. You gave me some help and a burst of energy here this morning when you said that there's some bipartisan sort of support for this, starting these businesses. And I would just want to quickly you talked about ESOPs, these employee stock option plans, worker-owned businesses, and compare that to a worker cooperative. But let me go back even a little bit further for people that may not have been on before. There are 4 basic types of co-ops. The first one it could be any business that if it's owned by the employees, owned and controlled. That's the difference. Owned and controlled by the employees is called a worker cooperative. If it's owned by the people that uses the products and services, it's called a consumer cooperative. And the types of those are credit unions, housing co-ops. It could be any business. In Madison, Wisconsin, there's a clinic that's owned by the patients. It's a patient-centric clinic. So it's a it's a clinic that is owned by the patients, so it's more preventive medicine is what the patients decided that they wanted. And the other 2 main types are if it's a group of people that come together, businesses or people that come together to purchase things together. Farmers are the main people that have been using this purchasing co-ops. They come together and they buy, whether it's gasoline or feed or fertilizer or big tractors or warehouse space or refrigeration. They buy it together. And the other one is on the other end of this. Oh, by the way, Andrew, more artists are getting into this purchasing piece where they may come together. If they are making jewelry and wood stuff, they may buy a warehouse, or they may rent a storefront that they all sell their products from. The other side of it is the selling, the marketing of the products. Farmers, again, have used this a lot. Department of Agriculture particularly have been very much involved in cooperatives. So things like the milk products, the cheese products, Ocean Spray with their different drinks, they're all farmers, groups and groups of farmers come together and bring their products, and then they would market these products so that they can get to different markets and normally get a better price. So those are the different types of co-ops. And Andrew, and through my formal education, I knew nothing about co-ops. I wasn't taught about co-ops. And I just find it a fascinating model for everything that you're talking about. It helps the individual family. It helps the community in all of the different kinds of ways. And we talked about financial wealth, but it's the social wealth too. The people learn how to work together, and they learn how to solve problems together. And if there's going to be problems, and they learn how to, when there's disagreements and disputes, they learn how to get in a room and talk it through. I keep saying I would like for our politicians to get some co-op training. So we can get some bipartisan agreement and some negotiations, so we don't close down the government here coming tomorrow. So those are the different types of co-ops, and the difference between an ESOP and the worker cooperative. And it was interesting that these laws are available for ESOPs now for, 40 years or so, but not for worker-owned cooperatives. In cases of an ESOP, they may own the business, but they may not control it. But in a co-op, you have to own and control that business.
No, that's right. And so the ESOP, has been a model where
we got to come back and talk about. I'm sorry,
okay,
Andrew. We have to take our final break, and we'll come back and talk about ESOPs, and I also want to talk about manufacturing. We'll be right back.
Washington, D.C.'s News Talk, 1450 AM WOF and 95.9 FM.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Everything Cooperative. My name is Vernon Oakes. And, this program is brought to you by the National Cooperative Bank, whose mission is to support and be an advocate for America's cooperatives and their members, especially in low-income communities, by providing innovative financial and related services. So, Andrew, before we took the break, you were going to talk about ESOPs.
So, yeah, ESOPs are, a way in which employees can, take ownership in a company. They're different from cooperatives in that there's still typically a management, team in place that is, running day-to-day operations. But they've been in a number of cases, a very strong way for employees, to gain wealth, and in a variety of sectors. I think you mentioned manufacturing. That's been a sector where there's been some successes in conversions for ESOPs. I kind of came close to ESOPs because it was a way, particularly looking at how to help distressed businesses. For workers to get involved in and buy a business that's distressed, and there have been some successful long running ESOPs that have helped distressed businesses move forward.
If a business is distressed, a lot of times it means that they're not making money, they're not profitable, or they don't have sales up, or there's some other problem. Why would an ESOP be able to help solve that problem if it's distressed?
Well, one way it can help solve the problem, and it needs to be and workers need to be well advised that there's still a market for the for the products, and it's still strategically competitive. But if those things are still true, it can provide a new source of capital for that business. And very concretely, if there's a company that has some pension obligations to workers, that can be converted into stock into that company. That can provide a direct kind of easing of the balance sheet of the company, and make it easier for them to get other forms of capital that are needed to get through a period of distress.
I was also wondering if there's any research that shows that with an ESOP that's taken over a distressed business, that when you get the grassroots, when you get people involved that's in the business, you get ideas from the employees. They're on the floor. They know how the place operates. And therefore, you may have efficiencies that show up. You may have ideas on new markets or all kinds of ways that the employees getting involved in ownership would show up that turns into profit. Is there any research like that?
I haven't. I think there's a good set of research, and it happens in both, ESOPs and other types of businesses when, when workers are more involved in production and spotting problems and coming up with solutions, companies are more productive. And I think, certainly in a cooperative, but in an employee-owned business, if it's set up that, it increases the incentive for workers to want to be involved in pointing out problems, and they kind of have a different kind of stake in, what's going to happen in that business.
increase incentives, therefore perhaps increase productivity, increase in looking at how to resolve issues, and that hits to the bottom line.
Yeah, we've always had this one bottleneck, and I've had an idea about how to solve it. The best companies set up regular structures for workers in the front line to share those ideas. And these are companies in all different parts of the economy, and let's share ideas from the front line about how to do things more efficiently, because that's what people want to do. But if you don't set up a way, an incentive or a way for them to share their ideas, they're not going to share them.
Real quickly, I worked on the assembly line in Ford in Dearborn, Michigan, right outside of Detroit, when I was 18. And there was no incentive for ideas. Okay. That was an interesting time period. But you're absolutely correct. I was looking at this whole idea of worker-owned co-ops or even ESOPs, that one of the benefits to the employee and the worker is that their ideas are wanted, they'll be cherished, they'll be looked at. And if it turns out to be profitable, then they get to share in that profit through dividends. And in a worker-owned cooperative, the workers decide if there's a surplus or a profit, how much of that comes to the employees and how much of it stays in the business. And they may say a certain portion of it will go out to help solve other problems in the community. That's why I like co-ops. I love co-ops.
No, absolutely. It's a very, I think it's, one thing we didn't touch on that's particularly, relevant right now is a lot of small businesses are owned by aging Americans, just the demographics. And here's this opportunity through worker ownership to help people keep their jobs and maybe make ownership a little more diverse. Hopefully maybe much more diverse as the country gets more diverse, as these, many of the businesses, people have and this is the story here, you have privately owned business and someone who's been running it and their family, their children don't want to run the business, so they have a choice to sell or close, and often they don't want to do that. Well, let's have one other option is for the workers to own it, either as a ESOP and have that structure, or as a worker-owned cooperative. And so there's a lot of interest, and I've spoken at the very highest levels, and people in the Senate who are very interested in making this more possible, and see some opportunities to have more worker ownership as we face what some people call, and I kind of like this term, the silver tsunami. People that are getting, so many people are getting older. At the top of these small businesses, there's going to be a lot of change that's going to happen in the next couple of decades.
Silver tsunami. I'm in that silver age, buddy. This baby boomer age stuff. And I own a business, and I'm looking at making it a worker-owned cooperative for all of the reasons that you just talked about. And there was a quote in this article of reducing economic inequality through democratic worker ownership. With a cooperative, you don't have to worry about a buyout. You don't have to worry about a CEO one day picking up the company and moving it. With a cooperative, you can have confidence that the company and the wealth it generates is going to stay local. I'm going, amen. The other thing in this article that I found interesting, they looked at Quebec, at cooperatives. There are 62% of them stayed alive. I don't see the amount of time here, where non-cooperatives only 35% stayed alive. I assume that's in 5 years. In the United Kingdom, 80% of co-ops were in business after 5 years, where only 41% of non-cooperative businesses were still alive. And in Italy, which you mentioned earlier, 87% of cooperatives stayed in business after 5 years, where only 48% of non-cooperative. So they stay in business a lot longer. They stay put. Andrew, we have 1 minute left. Thank you so very much. I knew you were going to have a lot to say, and I could talk to you for another hour. What would you like to leave people with today?
Well, no, I think start thinking about new ways to develop this economy. And please, I definitely encourage people to follow us on at tcf.org. We're trying to always to put out great ideas and welcome your feedback.
tcf.org, thecenturyfoundation.org, tcf.org. Thank you so very much, Andrew. Let's look for new ways, and I'd love to keep talking to you.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great week, and please live cooperatively.
Washington, D.C.'s News Talk, 1450 AM WOL at 95.9.